Growing up in Papua, I have discovered that the jungle was made for airplanes and airplanes were made for the jungle. I figured out that I was spending about 3 weeks out of every month just trekking through the jungle in different areas. And when I came back here to the US, I knew that somehow I needed to solve that problem. I was speaking to a group of ladies, and the organization that I was with at the time said, you know, you don't put your wish list out in front of people, just tell them what's going on. So I was talking to them, and suddenly in the middle of my talk, talking about how rugged it is and how difficult, a little old lady put up her hand and she said, why don't you buy one of those little ultralight airplanes? And I said, that's a beautiful idea, and it opened the door for me to kind of talk a little bit about that. And as I was talking, 2 men came to the back of the room, the church, and just sat there through the whole meeting. And when we were done, I was walking out, and these 2 men came up and they said, John, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm actually going to an airport. I've talked to them about coming to see a demonstration of an ultralight aircraft. They said, can we come with you? And so we went, we had lunch together, and they said, John, do you really convinced that this is the machine that you could use out there? And I said, I really am. Well, I continued speaking in their church for several more days, and at the end of that time, the 2 men came up to me again and they said, John, if you really think that's the machine, we are ready to buy it. And those 2 men were the guys who sponsored the first little airplane, ultralight airplane, to fly in Papua many, many years ago. We're going to fast forward to 2020 now. We have an airplane that's ready to go to the jungle. It was a donation. God worked out a person to donate. God worked out people to give the needed parts, engines. God worked out the perfect person to build it, to construct it, to get it ready. And now we are ready to take this airplane out to Papua to be used to train Papuans to fly so that they can serve their people. Taking medicines into the jungle, flying patients out of the jungle, moving teachers in and out, doing some of the critical things that need to happen in a place where there are very few roads and very few vehicles.
Welcome to Papua, Indonesia. I want to share with you just a little bit about our plans for training local people here. We're required by the government to be training nationals. And of course, as we look at the furtherance of the gospel here, we think of having local people doing that. One of the challenges we have is that training somebody in the US, you'd normally use a small aircraft and then they would gain experience and progress their way up. Here, where we're dealing with some of the most challenging flying in the world, we're kind of expected to take somebody and train them and immediately put them in this 10-seater bush plane, which is a bit of a jump. It's kind of like taking a new driver in driver's ed and putting them in a semi-truck. And so what we're trying to do is use a Zen Air 701 is our experienced builder aircraft, where it can still perform into the short runways, but it can also be used for the students to gain some experience and to further their skills before we move them into a more difficult aircraft like this one.
We believe aviation is extremely important in a place with terrain like we have here in Papua, and that is why we'd like to help our brothers and sisters to be able to move, if necessary, to places where they can have support, like medical support and things. And that's why we believe aviation is so important.
I met Paul, who was at the airport in Cleveland, Georgia.
I was working on an airplane near where we're standing, and John Cutts drove up and stopped and said that he had a similar airplane, and we became acquainted, and he started talking about his work as a missionary and being associated with the Missionary Alliance Church, and so we immediately had a great connection there.
He had a hangar. He had built the exact same airplane, and the same airplane that was donated was put into his hangar, and he was able to completely redo the airplane and redo some of the things that would not fit in the jungle. And it is now completely ready. It is taken apart and ready to be put in the box the container and sent to Papua. This flight program for Papua would have never happened had God not brought several key people together. First of all, we had Robert and Madeline Mitchell. It was their donation that got the ball rolling. And then John and Karen Krishbaum donated the brand new engine to go into this aircraft. And then all of that was kind of donated through an organization run by Steve Saint, which is ITEC. And without all of these people, this would have never happened. We thank God for their input and for their help. I'd like to first of all encourage you to be praying that we can bring all of this together, we can get this plane out there safely, we can get the program set up. But in addition to that, funds will certainly be needed for covering some of the operating costs for students, taking care of those students, materials, and whatnot. And then, of course, operating these aircraft out in remote areas certainly takes some money. So those may be things that you would want to stay up to date on and check with our website from time to time. And they may be things that you would like to be a part of, as we are still, even at this point, getting spare parts to send out with the aircraft, and also covering some of the costs for shipping and transportation.